Yeah, it's now live.
Lovely, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this virtual Finance Audit and Risk Committee that's being conducted with members and officers at various locations, communicating via audio and video and online. Before the meeting starts, I'd like to invite the committee member and scrutiny officer to explain how proceedings will work and to confirm that members and officers are in attendance.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening, everyone. Please note that the meeting is being streamed live onto YouTube and recorded via Zoom. I'm now just going to undertake a roll call. Councillor Aspinwall.
And here.
Thank you. Councillor North.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Collins.
Hello.
Thank you very much. Councillor Deacon Davies is currently absent, and Councillor Derbyshire has advised he's running a bit late. Apologies were received from Councillor Adam Ruggiero Chaka, and Councillor Helen Oliver is subbing for him this evening. And Councillor Weeks.
Present.
Thank you very much. We also have Councillor Ian Albert in attendance.
Good evening.
Thank you. In terms of NHDC officers, Ian Cooper.
Present.
Thank you. Ruben Ayavu.
Present.
Thank you. External partners, Mark Chalkley.
Present.
Thank you. Nick Jennings.
Present.
Thank you very much. Suresh Patel.
Good evening.
Thank you. And Robert Garnett.
I think Robert might have dropped off. He was having some issues. He's trying to get back on again, I think.
Okay, sure. I'll let him in and can confirm that when he is in. Extracts from the remote/partly remote meetings protocol are included with the agenda, and the full version is available on the council's website. Members are requested to ensure they are familiar with the protocol. And just for your information, this evening, voting for the purpose of this meeting, votes will be conducted by roll call. When it's time to vote, if you could respond with yes, no, or abstain. Thank you. And Robert Garnett's just joining now, so I'll confirm that he can hear us. Evening, Robert. Evening, Robert. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. That's all the introduction done, Chair.
Lovely, thanks ever so much. Can I just double check that we've got audio on Councillor Oliver, who is now just fallen off my screen. We did. Oh, there she is. We didn't get audio from you, Helen.
Sorry, I think I cleverly muted myself instead of unmuting myself.
All right, easily done. So thank you, Helen, for standing in for Adam. That's much appreciated. Right, brilliant. So since the beginning of March, March 2020, when we started to hold meetings remotely, we've been unable to approve minutes of meetings. We are now able to approve minutes with the electronic signature of the chair being applied following approval. We did this at our last meeting and did the big bulk of last year, which is wonderful. So the only minutes that we've got to approve at this committee are the minutes from the 18th of January 2021. And so I would like to propose that we take as read and approve as a true record of the minutes of the meeting that was held on that date. Could I have a seconder, please, preferably somebody that was there?
I'm happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, Sam. Do we need to take a vote on that?
Yes, please, Chair. I'll just run through. So, Councillor Aspinwall.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Collins.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Deacon Davies absent. Councillor Derbyshire is absent. Councillor North.
4.
Thank you. And Councillor Weeks.
4.
Thank you very much. That's carried, Chair.
Wonderful, thank you. So I now authorise the committee member and scrutiny officer to apply my electronic signature and initials to the approved minutes. Thank you very much. Item 4, and you all know I like to rattle through this agenda quite quickly, so we will do that, but I think it's going to be a fairly long one tonight, having reread. We'll go quite quick. Item 4, I've got no notification of other business, you'll be pleased to hear. So now I just move into the chair's announcements. Audio recording. In accordance with council policy, this meeting is being audio recorded as well as filmed. The audio recordings will be available to view on mod.gov and the film recording by the NHDC YouTube channel. declarations of interest. Your members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. A detailed reminder about this and speaking rights is set out under Chair's announcements on the agenda. Item number 6, I have no items of public participation. So let's move into the more substantive items then. And number 7, Ernst & Young, the audit plan for 2021. And Suresh, you're with us and you're going to be presenting this, I believe.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Good evening to members of the committee. Before I just introduce the plan, I'd just like to introduce Robert Garnett, who you'll have seen pop up on the screen. Robert has taken over from Nazir Mohammed as the audit manager for North Herts, and some of you might recognise Robert because he was actually a member of the audit team 3 years ago as the lead senior, and has now progressed to manager role. So you will be seeing more of Robert in due course. But I'll take you through the 2021 plan, which is in your papers and commences on page 13. I'm going to just take you through the overview pages, and then I'm happy to take any questions. So if I take you to page 17, where we've got an overview of the risks and areas of audit focus, I think it's fair to say that 2021 financial statements are the year where you will see the full impact of COVID-19 in respect of the grant funding that you've received from government, significant levels of grant funding you've clearly received, additional expenditure and the loss of income that you've incurred. If you remember last year's audit, we looked at things like going concern and property valuations because they'd been impacted by COVID-19 landing at the end of March. But this year, your accounts will actually show those significant levels of transactions going through the council. And in some cases, in respect of how you account for those, is going to be an area of focus for us. So I'll just explain the changes that you'll see on pages 17 and 18. So the first 2 risks we've got there are actually linked and typically do appear as audit risks in the most local authority audit plans, but in the last few years they haven't appeared for North Herts because we've taken the view that whilst there's always a potential for management to override controls, the strength of the council's financial resilience and I suppose the lack of real concern around financial resilience has meant that we've never really then associated that risk to anything in particular. I think this year, given the impact of COVID on your finances and a general uncertainty, we've recognised the risk around management override, and we've linked that to the risk that you could capitalise what you should be treating as revenue expenditure. So you've got a capital programme of 2.4 million. So we'll be focusing on that to ensure that that is all genuine capital expenditure that has gone through the 2021 accounts. The third risk there, valuation of investment properties, was a significant risk last year, but the risk last year was driven by the impact of COVID-19, as I said, at the year end. This year, we understand that you are planning to engage an external valuation expert to support your valuation of your investment properties. And because of that change, we've continued to recognise that as a significant risk. We've got then 2 inherent risks, and these are inherent to almost all local authorities where there's a significant balance of property, plant and equipment, and we've identified that as an inherent risk. And similarly, going concern disclosure, as I mentioned earlier, that was a focus particularly last year because of the initial impact of COVID, but this year we'll be looking again at your assessment and how you have disclosed within your accounts any uncertainties, any concerns around your overall financial sustainability and liquidity. Over the page, on page 18, we've got the pension liability valuation. Obviously, that's one of the biggest estimates in your balance sheet, so that is always an area of focus. And then we've got 2 new risks, which again will appear in the majority of local authority audit plans that we issue this year. The first one is around the non-domestic rate appeals provision. And we are aware that the provision is likely to increase significantly as a result of a number of organisations claiming a material change of circumstances in respect of their business rates, and that we're seeing that across the board at district councils up and down the country. Similarly, in terms of how you account for the significant level of government grants that you've received, the judgment that you need to make is whether or not you are acting as what's called an agent, where in effect the money is just flowing through you, and you are passporting that money to a third party without much influence and direction, or where you do have more direction and influence, whether or not you should be accounted for as a principal, which then obviously goes through your actual account. So that's a pretty key judgment call that you need to make, and we're obviously going to be sharing our own insights into what we see other authorities do in respect to those grants, but we know that the finance team is already looking at how it will be accounting for those significant levels of grant that you've received. Also on that page to highlight is there has been a change to the auditing standard around accounting estimates, and I've just summarised there what that means in terms of the audit. And then over the page on 19, it's always useful to highlight to you as committee members the levels of materiality that we operate to, particularly the audit differences level, which is where we have a threshold for what we report to you as either errors or differences. In terms of audit scope, just worthwhile noting that this is the first year that we are operating under the National Audit Office's new Code of Audit Practice, and the biggest change there relates to value for money, which I cover on page 20 in summary. That just gives you a summary of what those changes are. Just to note that the one thing that's changed since I issued this report is that the NAO is cognizant of the pressures on both authorities and auditors in terms of delivering 2021 accounts and audits, and is currently looking at how it can pare back the requirements under the new code for this year. So at the moment, underneath those 3 reporting criteria that I've listed, there's about 15 specific arrangements that we are meant to be focused on, but they're looking at reducing those to a smaller level to reduce the amount of work we need to do for 2021. And we'll have more details of that hopefully in the next few weeks. And then 2 more things, just in terms of timeline. You might be aware that MHCLG have recently consulted on changing the date that you need to publish your draft accounts. They're planning for that to be the 1st of August. That then creates a bit of an issue in terms of then if the target date for publishing audited accounts is the end of September, you can see that from a national perspective, trying to have all authorities have their accounts audited by the 30th of September, if they're only issuing their draft accounts 1st of August, is clearly going to be problematic. And we've fed back that to MHCLG in terms of that reporting date of the end of September not being realistic. Having said that, you'll see later on in the report on section 7, we have got a provisional timeline, which we are agreeing with the finance team, where we will be looking to carry out your audit in July, early August, with a view to completing and reporting well in advance of the end of September. And then finally on fees, you'll recall various discussions we've had on fees, and I've just repeated some of the information there in section 8. But in essence, PSA is still to determine on both the proposed increase to the scale fee that we made early last year, but also the final additional fees that we proposed on the 1920 audit of the accounts. I'll stop there, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions.
That's lovely. Thank you very much, Suresh, and welcome to Robert, and congratulations. Okay, I'll just open it up then to members who has got questions, comments, anything they'd like to interrogate on there. And Councillor Weeks, you raised your hand.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Suresh, first of all, you did touch on the way that valuations of our investment properties are to be carried out externally, or are already being carried out externally. Previous to that, the valuations are carried out in-house. I don't know if it's a question for you, but do we know why there was a change of policy here at all?
I think that might be a question for Ian in terms of
yes, exactly. I agree.
Ian, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah. So the board has been valuing the assets recently under the Institute of Chartered Surveyor guidelines, kind of do it for a certain number of years before it's determined that they are essentially conflicted and too ingrained in doing it. He is coming to the end of that period, and so therefore, as part of the transition in this year, we are getting someone in to do some of the valuations, and in future years they'll do more of the valuations so that the person isn't doing it for too long a period under those guidelines. And that's the reason we're moving between the two.
Okay, Chairman, could I ask another question, please?
You may, but please stop calling me chairman. I'm a woman. Thank you.
With regard to your strategy for last year, Suresh, I know it's old hat now, but at the beginning of your strategy statement, there are 3 bright red risks which appeared. They're all different, but do we know if there was any sort of instances where these risks actually manifested themselves? One is misstatements due to fraud, inappropriate capitalisation, and variation on investment properties. If you get the gist of my question.
Sorry, you're asking me a question about last year's audit?
Well, I'm asking you about last year's strategy, yes. I know it's a little late in the day, but it is with the papers here this evening.
Oh, okay. So
do we know if there are actually occurrences of those risks across any districts and councils?
Not that we identified, because clearly we would have reported those to you as those charge of governance if we had identified instances of those types of matters.
Sorry to interrupt. I don't mean within North Herts, but I mean across the country as a whole. I mean, are there precedents that this happened?
I can't comment on individual councils across the country. From my own experience, there can be occasions when we identify that management has overridden controls or has inappropriately valued particularly investment properties. So yes, there has been instances, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Suresh, and thank you, Councillor Weeks. Is there anybody else that has any questions or comments? Or Ian, did you want to talk on this at all as the director for this area?
I suppose just to confirm that we are happy with the timeline of audit proposed. So we have had conversations with Suresh on that, and we understand the pressure being placed on Ernst & Young in relation to the various guidelines they have to meet in terms of the requirements on them, and that is why there are so many things they have to do and so much they have to look into, even though it might seem slightly over the top. It is a requirement on them, and it obviously makes sure that they're reporting on the right things.
Thank you very much. I have no other. Oh, sorry, muted myself. I have no other hands up, so the recommendation is simply that we note this report. So can I propose that we are happy to note this report, and is there anyone that's happy to second that? And then we'll just do a round on the verbal vote.
Happy to second that one, Chair.
Thank you, Sam.
Chair.
Thanks. Or Kate. I'm happy to be called Kate. Yeah. Should we do a quick vote on that?
Agreed.
Matthew.
Sure, Chair. Yeah. Councillor Aspinwall.
Yes, 4.
Councillor Collins.
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Councillor North.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Weeks.
Agreed.
Thank you. And Councillor Oliver.
4.
Thank you. That's carried, Chair.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Suresh, I think that might be your piece to answer. You're free to leave or stay, whichever you prefer to do. And Robert, I think it's the same for you. Just quickly checking through my notes here. So feel free to stay if you'd like to, or you may slip away if you'd prefer to do something else. Right, we'll move on to item 8, which is SIAS Internal Audit Progress Report. And I think, Mark, you're going to be presenting that for us.
Thank you, Chair. So the progress report, a very, very quick update at this time of year because we're so close to the end of the year. So, you know, we're getting towards the crunch time. So I'll run through this relatively quickly for you. The table at paragraph 2.2 on page 57 of your pack just highlights the final reports that have been issued since the last committee. Members will note that there's one in there from 1920 that we finalised this year. That's just denoted by 1920 after the audit title. That wasn't included in our overall annual opinion last year, so we will include it in our annual opinion this year. And you'll also note there were 3 high priority recommendations made in that report. 2.4, just paragraph 2.4, just comments on the 3 high priority recommendations. And there's further updates at Appendix B on the progress towards implementation on each of those. Paragraph 2.7, just to note a slight change in audit title. So the parking strategy and enforcement audit, we've revised the title to that to parking income. This was changed in agreement with the Service Director for Regulatory Services. Given the impact of COVID-19 on the progress of the parking strategy, it wasn't deemed appropriate to carry out any audit work in that area. However, we have used the days to look at the financial income aspect of parking services. So we will be providing some assurance in that area, just not what it was originally titled. And moving down to the table at paragraph 2.9, I'd just like to update you on our figures as of Friday. So the 2 key performance indicators for us are planned days and planned projects. They're the key indicators in terms of how well we're performing or how on track we are to meeting those. And as of Friday last week, we've now delivered 272.5 days, which is 93%. So I can say with a fair degree of confidence, we're probably going to reach 95% on that one. And in terms of projects, we issued a further 2 projects than's reported here. So we've done 18 out of 24, which is 75%. Further to that, we've got 1 in quality review, which is the stage before it gets issued. So that should go out at some point this week. And sitting here today with 3 weeks or so to go, I'm confident that we'll get at least 4 of those 5 issued to draft before the end of the year, which would take us past the 95% target that's included within our performance indicators. So relatively confident for the rest of the year, with all things being well and no unexpected things happening, which you can't really guarantee at this time of the life. Yeah, hopefully we will get there, and we're looking promising to get there. I'll whiz past Appendix A. That just details all the audits and the progress we've made on those. Appendix B provides members with a history of management management comments in terms of the implementation of the high priority recommendations. The members will note that 3 of the 5 high priority recommendations have now been classified as implemented by management. So the next report won't show those implemented recommendations. It will just carry the 2 that are in progress. You should note that one of the implemented recommendations relates to the financial resilience audit that was only issued in January. So next time we will only bring in the 2 outstanding ones to the committee. And moving on to Appendix C, again, this just gives you the timetable of when work is due to start, and the 2 projects that have now gone to draft report are revenues and benefits. So everything up to the start of, well, excluding Integra, everything up to the start of Q4 has now been completed. Yeah, as I say, we're on track. So that's just a really quick update on the progress report. So if there's any questions, happy to answer them.
Thanks, Mark. Did you want to say something on assurance levels?
Yeah, I can say that now. I had that noted for the next report, but happy to talk about that now. So Appendix D outlines our assurance opinions that we're using this year. Sit for release some guidance during this year to try and standardise assurance opinions across local authorities. So next year, from April the 1st, we'll be using slightly amended assurance opinions. So the changes are relatively minor. The assurance level good will change to substantial. The assurance level satisfactory will change to reasonable. And there's some very minor tweaks to the definitions associated with those. This is due for discussion at the SIAS board tomorrow. So provided it's agreed there, I'll bring that to the June committee. But I just wanted to give everybody a bit of a heads up, given that April falls before June, and you receive all final reports. So I didn't want you to see something and not be quite sure what had happened or why it happened. So yeah, it was just an early warning, really.
That's brilliant, thank you. And Mark, can I just say that's really positive for the progress that's been made there, and also really well prepared papers. Thank you. I appreciate the brevity and succinctness of those, and very clear.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions or comments for Mark on this report? Give you a moment to think about those. I've got no hands up at all. Okay, that's a good sign. Well done, Mark. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
We don't have any recommendations with that one, I don't think. Or do we? That just that we need to note them, so we'll have to do the same thing again. I propose, therefore, that we note this as written. Can I have a seconder for that, and then we'll do a quick round robin vote.
Happy to second again, Chair.
Thank you, Sam. Right, Matthew, can we do a quick vote on that?
Sure, thanks, Chair. Councillor Aspinwall.
Yes, 4.
Thank you. Councillor Collins.
4.
Thank you. Councillor North.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Weeks.
4.
Thank you. And Councillor Oliver.
4.
Thanks very much. That's carried, Chair.
Thank you. And can I just apologise for my audio if it is coming over a little bit crackly, distorted. I'm just trying to remove some background noise, and when that's gone, I'll be able to have better audio. But apologies if that is giving anyone a headache. Okay, right. So we are carried on that. So let's go back to Mark then for item 9, the internal audit plan for 21-22.
Thank you, Chair. A slightly longer report, this one, I'm afraid. Starting at the top, the introduction and background just gives the kind of professional context in which we're setting our audit plans this year. It refers to the audit charter and the public sector internal audit standards, which are the internal document that supports the scope of our work, and the professional standards that we have to meet to demonstrate we're acting in the way we should. So that just gives a little bit of context around that. Moving on to section 2, this essentially outlines kind of our planning principles, our planning approach, and kind of how we've drawn the plan together. So I won't run through all of it. I'll just pick out some key bits. So essentially the approach we've taken to audit planning this year is similar to most other years in that we'll conduct some horizon scanning looking at local and national audit issues. We'll compare to other local authorities in terms of the risks that they're facing, the risks North Herts are facing. We've created sort of an audit universe of all audit subjects we've covered over the last 5 years to see whether there are any gaps in risks or auditable areas that we haven't covered. I met with each service director individually to discuss key risks, key priorities, key projects within their particular area of responsibility. That included a managing director as well, to get the kind of overarching view from him. Once we'd kind of drawn all those conversations to a close, I attended senior leadership team to present the draft plan, to look through the categorization of it was mainly the high priorities that we focused on. And I'm pleased to report that any areas that were classified as high risk or high priority have been included in the plan this year. So that's essentially how the plan was drawn together. The context that we were working within is that the audit plan's reduced by 50 days this year. So last year, unadjusted, it was 320 days. If you remember, we adjusted it as a result of COVID and the impact that had on resources. So for next year, the number of days that have been purchased are 270 days. And the table at paragraph 2.9, where the page goes on its side, This shows you the comparison between years in terms of percentage of days and where they're being used. So the key ones that kind of stick out for me is that the kind of corporate council-wide audits have significantly increased this year, whereas the operational audits have decreased. But the way I'm viewing that is I'm looking at both of those together. So corporate audits and operational audits this year, approximately, was that 47% of our time is being spent on those audits. Last year, 44% of our time, so it's still about right. But obviously, those figures stand out quite a bit in that table. A lot of that's to do with the impact of COVID, the fact that it's affecting the whole council. It's not necessarily individual service areas. Therefore, kind of putting additional time in to look at council-wide issues is the right thing to do, given that's where the risk is. Moving down the report, one of the things that we've looked at this year, given the flexibility that needed to be shown throughout this year, is that perhaps we need to be a bit more on the front foot in terms of being able to flex the plan. So the intention this year is, whilst we've proposed an annual plan, the intention is to essentially conduct another round of kind of mini planning meetings during August, September time to ensure that any work planned for quarters 3 or 4 is still appropriate to be done. There's been no changes of priority, no changes of risk exposure or anything like that. So that allows us to change anything in advance of kind of, well, in response to anything that's happened in the first half of the year. So any changes or amendments that that we're looking to make to the audit plan will be brought before the FAR committee in September. So we'll make sure all those meetings have taken place before then. Section 3 of the report outlines the key performance indicators, which are the same as this year. They haven't changed since they were introduced in 2011 when SIAS was created. So all of those remain the same. And then we're into Appendix A, which provides members with a high-level overview of the proposed scope or risk of the audit. Also this year I've included the reason why we've included it in the plan, just at a high level to assure members that we are looking at the highest risk things, we are looking at the key priorities for the council. Moving down to Appendix B, that's a list of reserve audits that, should any of those planned in Appendix A be unable to take place, then the first thing we'll do is look at the reserve list to see if we can pull any of those in and deliver those instead. And finally, Appendix C is the timetable for when we're planning to start each audit. So happy to take any questions after that quick run through.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Mark. Do I have any questions or comments for Mark at all? Councillor Weeks.
Sorry, I beg your pardon.
Right.
With regard to Appendix A, pages 11 and 12, there are 3 audits there relating to COVID. You do have the recovery audit listed to be carried out in the first quarter. I would have thought, though, very, very important that that one is done very early in the first quarter. Would you agree with me there?
What we've done with the recovery audit, just to provide a bit of context around that, because we, during our discussions during audit planning, we agreed that currently we're still in response phase. This was sort of in January, February time. And obviously moving forward, restrictions are still going to be in place. Therefore, I think we're of the opinion that the response is we're still responding to it. The recovery pieces are more sort of wide ranging in terms of the kind of longer term recovery, the short, medium and long term recovery. So what we've looked at doing is splitting that audit in 2, and early on in the year, so in April, May, June time, looking at how we're planning to carry out recovery activity. And then later in the year in quarter four, given that probably 6 to 9 months would have elapsed between that initial piece of work and the next piece, we're looking at how that's been implemented, and the actions that have been taken and the outcomes from those actions. So a long answer to a straightforward question, but yes, it will be carried out early in the year. It's planned for April, May, I would imagine it would start.
Yeah, if I could just carry on very briefly. Hopefully we are moving into the recovery stage now, fingers crossed. But I think it's very important that we do check that the council is doing everything possible to bring in recovery at the very earliest stage, and that's down to you, isn't it?
In order to carry out that check, do you mean? I think it's important to assess how the council is responding to that risk. I'm not necessarily sure we're best placed above management to decide when it's time to bring that recovery action in. I think our role is to ensure that kind of the governance and risk management approach to recovery is right and robust. In terms of timings, I think that's a management decision around when that would happen.
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with you there. Someone has to ensure that the council is moving properly with its recovery programme, and you're the people in the front line to actually check that, surely.
If I could just intervene, Ian, can I ask you what your thoughts are on the setting the recovery agenda and setting those plans out, and what's happening at a senior level, so that then presumably Mark can have a little bit more information to answer this question in terms of timelines of checking that that's actually happening.
Yes, I think the position of the council at the moment is that the vast majority of services are operating pretty much normally. Obviously, there have been phases throughout the pandemic when they haven't been. We've had to revert to sort of various situations where they've not been. There are still teams out there that are essentially struggling to get the work done, particularly sort of areas like environmental health, where they're still under extreme amounts of workload because of the various directions that have been pulled in. So I think part of the recovery is around helping our staff to recover in terms of getting them back to sort of doing the normal level of work in the normal way. And then there'll be the wider recovery in terms of how we can support both our residents and business, etc., to a reasonable degree to recover as well. So yes, I think we will be moving into that phase fairly soon, hopefully. It will be initially for the executive and for senior managers to determine when that is and what that looks like. And obviously, I suppose, through cabinet, there'll be some degree of challenge around how that happens and when. And then from that, so the plans will form. It is the role of SIAS to check how we implement our plans and the success in them, not for them to determine when we do it. They are there to essentially review how management are performing and how the council is performing, not to get involved at the first stage. Occasionally we use them as sort of consultancy advice, but in this respect, the audit is very much around, we've got a plan, how's it going, and then how well does it go when it's happened. So I think that's kind of the role of SIAS in terms of that journey, and how they have to maintain a degree of independence to enable them to sort of provide a impartial review later on.
Thank you. Thanks, Ian. Councillor Weeks, is that helpful? Does that respond to your query well enough?
Yeah, I think Ian seems to have a good grip on it. That's what I was seeking, really, to know that someone is actually looking at recovery programme as such. So that's good to hear. Thank you.
Do I have any other questions or comments at all on this item? Anyone? Ian, Albert, you've got your hand up.
Only, Chair, if you might indulge, and perhaps obviously just to help additionally to Mr. Cooper's answer, is that we do have the council has a response and recovery board which meets on a regular basis, of which is also attended by a cross-party group of councillors, including Councillor Levitt, and those plans are going through. Recovery plans are being looked at there. I guess in the future it's something that overview and scrutiny could look at, but just to assure, there is that response and recovery board which is made up of officers and a cross-party group of councillors.
That's brilliant, thank you, Ian. And I think it's important to note that kind of nobody at this stage could possibly know what that recovery will actually look like. And certainly, I don't think that anybody has been planning to return to the status quo as it was a year and a half ago. So yeah, I think that's really encouraging work. And thank you for your assurances there. Do I have any other questions or comments on this item at all? I've got no other hands up. Okay, so our recommendation on this one is then that we approve the internal audit plan. Have I got that right? Yep. So I'd like to propose that we approve this, and can I have a seconder for that?
Happy to second.
Thank you ever so much, Sam. Right, can we just do a quick vote on that then, please?
Sure. Councillor Aspinwall.
I'm for that.
Thank you. Councillor Collins.
For.
Thank you. Councillor North.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Weeks.
For.
Thank you. And Councillor Oliver.
For.
Thank you very much. It's carried, Chair.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone. Mark, I think you're done. So same for you. If you would like to leave and have a different kind of an evening, please feel free. If you'd like to stay and hang out with us, then you're also very welcome. Right.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to move on then to item number 10, the anti-fraud plan. So if I can get, I've got Nick Jennings and Darren Bowler. I don't know which of you are going to take the floor.
Nick, good evening, Chair. I'm Nick Jennings. I'll take the papers tonight. Thank you. Yes, Chair and committee members, good evening. We've got two reports rolled into one for you. One is to approve the anti-fraud plan for the for next year, for 21-22. And then we've got a very brief note on the activity that the council is undertaking at the moment to protect itself against fraud and corruption. And that is a very, very brief report at this point. So if I just take members to page 99 of your bundle, this is the proposed plan. So the plan we've put together this year with officers focuses very much on the new Fighting Fraud and Corruption Locally strategy for the 2020s. A document drawn up between SIPFA, SIFAS, the LGA, a number of other local government organisations, and it focuses on those four pillars of govern, acknowledge, prevent, pursue, to ensure that we accept and acknowledge that the authority is at risk of fraud, that we do what we can to prevent fraud as much as possible, but that where fraud does occur, we take appropriate action to pursue and recover losses. And overarching all of those is protect, which is again is just making sure that the authority is protecting itself against the risk of fraud. So that runs as a theme through the plan that we've put together. The plan in particular picks up at page 105, Appendix A. We've put together a checklist. This year, in fact, it's not our checklist, it's a checklist from the Fighting Fraud and Corruption Locally strategy. And we're going to test this, a little bit of an audit for the authority during the year for officers and for members indeed. There are some parts of that checklist where we'll be talking to indeed the chair of the audit committee as well as others to make sure they have the right levels of understanding, that we have across the authority the right levels of planning, preparation, to prevent fraud happening, and then we have the right resources, capacity and skills to investigate fraud where it does occur. So that's the theme of that particular plan. I don't intend to take members through that line by line, but I'm going to assume that members have looked at it and are happy to take questions. Appendix B on page 109 looks at our KPIs for next year. There again, as Mark said earlier, they're pretty much unchanged because they are focused on the things that the board, the SAFS board originally wanted the service to provide back to its partner organisations. There's a couple of tweaks at KPI 4. We've increased the number of training days or training events that we'll provide to officers and members in the next year. The reason for that is we really do want to start looking at some of the other fraud risks across the authority and delve and understand better what those fraud risks might look like by working with officers in sort of across all services. And then on KPI 5, we've actually removed one of the KPIs that we used to have around successful outcomes from investigations. The members may recall, probably don't, I wouldn't blame you, that we used to set ourselves a target to achieve a certain percentage of successful outcomes from our investigations. We were always hitting that target. It was 65%. We always hit the target. It was slightly perverse, so we decided to remove that this time. We'll still report to Ian and to officers, senior officer group, around our achievements when we're conducting investigations, and it will be in our annual report as well. But we thought it was a slightly perverse target to be chasing all the time, so we've removed that from the KPIs. Chair, at that point, I'm happy to take any questions that members might have on the anti-fraud plan, just before I very quickly go through the summary of outstanding work, unless you want to wait until the end to questions.
We do have a hand up, so yeah, let's we've got lots. This is obviously the most exciting point of the evening. So let's go with Sam first, and Sam North, if we could just have your questions.
Thanks, Chair. I've got three very quick, well, they're not very quick questions, but questions. You spoke about the audit committee and helping them with sort of understanding that they are doing the right things in terms of the anti-fraud, but you also cover sort of certain elements of corruption and bribery. So could you just talk about some of the elements that you do with our monitoring officers and our standards committee to ensure that members are acting appropriately, and that the processes in place that we have to tackle potential corruption and bribery could be tackled? My second, in fact, it's only two questions because I've just wrapped that into one question. My second question relates to the issue of the grants that we've been handing out recently to support people through the pandemic. And I just wanted to know if there'd been anything from your side that's seen any increase in fraud or anything like that due to the number of grants that we are giving out to support the people in need at the moment.
And Councillor, Chair, you happy for me to take those questions? Thank you. So just dealing with the first question, yes, you're right. There is a piece of work for us to do with the monitoring officer, and I expect to see Jeanette's name probably occurring at different places throughout the checklist as we run through that. The council already has in place really good governance to protect itself. It has a whistleblowing policy. We've got anti-fraud and corruption policy statements around money laundering, corruption, bribery. They're acknowledged really, within that overarching policy that you've got to prevent fraud and corruption. What we probably would want to see is how we join that up across the authority with training. So having a policy is great. It's just making sure that we've got the right training in place. People understand where they can access the policy and when they actually need to refer to that policy. So that's one of the training pieces we'll be doing. It is to make sure that officers understand what their role is, and that members as well understand what the rules are, particularly around bribery and corruption. And the second part of your question, grants, yes, we've seen some fraudulent grant applications at North Herts. Not unusual. We've seen that across all of our district partners. We're investigating a number of those at the moment. What I can say is we've recently done an assurance piece. We're waiting for some data actually to come back from the Cabinet Office and Bays at the moment, looking at how effective the work that business rates team in particular put in to make sure they paid those grants on time, they paid the right people, they paid the right amount, and they paid it to the right bank account. So we're waiting for that piece of assurance to come back at the moment. once we've got that, then we'll do some more work with the business rates team. But it is continuing because we've got grant schemes live at present, as well as those business grants that were paid at the beginning of the year. We've got ongoing grants because of the ongoing lockdown and impact on local businesses. So yeah, it's something that's at the forefront of our work at the moment.
Thank you. I just, if I may, Chair, wanted to come very, very briefly back to the first question. And that obviously relates to the question of corruption and bribery and things like that. And this perhaps isn't a question that will affect the report and what we decide upon tonight, but just perhaps for entertainment purposes. Could you tell me when a politician acts in what may be a corrupt fashion or is suspected of acting in a corrupt way, when that is decided to go to the police or when that is decided to be investigated by a monitoring officer, and whether there are set guidelines for who should investigate a sort of suspected corruption case?
I think I'll probably rely on Ian to confirm I'm right here for North Herts, but there is a policy in place. We've got a corruption policy. We've got members' standards. If there was a suggestion or an allegation about a member of this particular authority, and that's all I can refer to at the moment, obviously, that would go to the monitoring officer, and there will be a process for the monitoring officer to determine whether it would be a committee issue, whether it's standards committee, or whether it needed investigating by the police. But certainly that is the role of the monitoring officer within this authority.
Are you satisfied with that answer, Sam? Is that what you were after?
Very satisfied. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Brilliant. Right, Councillor Weeks, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Nick. Nick, in 3.3 of your report, you mention a new initiative called the Fighting Fraud and Corruption Locality Strategy. I take it that's something new, is it?
There's been a fighting fraud and corruption strategy for local government since about 2014. The latest one was published in March 2020, but this one now has got more support from those bodies like Solace, as well as SIPFA and CIFAS, who've supported it previously. So we've seen more support from those lobbying bodies across local government for this particular strategy.
Right, it's just that it reads as if it's something new, but I do believe I have heard of it before, and you just confirmed that. Chair, could I ask another question, please?
You may, yes.
Thank you very much. Nick, you say further down in your report that we have this year had 88 matters reported to us as possible fraud. Could you just tell me briefly how that compares with last year or previous years? Is 88 high? Is about the going rate, or so far as North Herts is concerned?
It's probably in previous years, one of our KPIs was a target for reporting the number of allegations that were received by the authority. Again, we've removed that because it's just a strange one to have. But that target in previous years has been 100, and we've been at or around 100 each year. So we're probably on target. This was those figures are from late January. So yeah, we'll probably see around 100 again for this year, I anticipate.
Yeah, right. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Weeks. And just before I come to you, Helen, just on those referrals, Nick, I'm led to believe that we've got a lot fewer from staff, which were traditionally the higher quality referrals, if that's the right language. Can you confirm that, and whether or not there's any action being taken on that?
Yes, you're right on a number of counts. Referrals from staff is reduced, and they are always the best quality referrals as well, because staff know their services and know what their risks are. We are doing a piece of work at the moment. In fact, two of my officers were attending some team meetings on Friday to try and encourage staff again to report fraud to us. We've seen a drop. We saw a drop from the public at one point as well, reported fraud as a result of lockdown. People's priority wasn't about reporting fraud, and And I have to say, it's, you know, as officers move to much more working from home, that I think we lost our visibility, and that's what we're working on at the moment. We're trying to raise our visibility across all those services so that people understand that there is still a fraud risk and they can still report it to us.
That's brilliant, thank you. And I think, yeah, it's all these unintended, or not unintended, because none of it was intended, but unforeseen kind of impacts of this lockdown, things like that, things that we weren't thinking about a year ago as being something that we'd all have to consider, but interesting to feed into that recovery plan. Yeah, thanks for that. Right, Helen, sorry, over to you.
It was more of a note, really. I completely understand what you mean by the relatively high amount of grant money that the council has been awarding. I think that's the point I wanted to make, was rather than handing out, we've been administering or awarding those grants.
Very much, and very efficiently as well, actually.
Thank you.
Do you want me just to finish off the report? Please, with that anti-fraud activity? So this is very, very brief. Members have already picked up the numbers of referrals that we're receiving. They continue to be in the areas where we expect to see them for district council without housing stock. It is around council tax, where there are discounts and benefits, some housing fraud or allegations of housing fraud where people are making false applications for housing. The business rates cases that we've picked up have been a mix of, I'm going to describe it as opportunistic individuals that took advantage of the grant scheme and the opportunity to apply for that beginning of April last year, where the business had ceased trading, but we still received some applications from those businesses. So we think it was a little bit opportunistic, rather than some of the planned and premeditated fraud that we've seen, organised fraud in particular, organised crime involved in some of the grant applications as well. One of the applications that we've got at the moment for business rates, the money's currently sat in a bank account with about 10 other councils' grants. It's a mule bank account, so fortunately we've got a financial investigator. That officer's managed to freeze that bank account, so we'll be able to recover that money back to NHDC, and that money will obviously go back to Bays as well. So we'll be able to recover that money for the government coffers. But currently we've got around 45 live cases at the moment. Estimated value of potential fraud loss from those cases is around £350,000. We've identified quite a small value of fraud so far for the authority. That is very small at the moment compared to what we normally identify. The reasons for that are twofold. One is that we work really, really closely with the Department for Work and Pensions on housing benefit fraud that's linked to council tax fraud. Those investigations, a lot of them have been suspended because the department has made a sensible decision at the current time to switch a lot of its effort to universal credit, rollout of that, and supporting that, preventing error and fraud in that system at this time. That's been their priority. So a lot of the staff that we normally work with in the DGP have been seconded elsewhere. And also another unintended consequence of the lockdown has been we can't interview anybody. Normally we'd interview people face to face, can't do that. We conduct voluntary interviews. We can't compel anybody. So, we're not going to suggest that somebody comes to a voluntary interview at a time where the government is saying don't travel unless you need to. So we are looking at some options around conducting interviews via Teams, Microsoft Teams, and we've been in touch just recently with the legal team to make sure that if we were conducting an interview in that manner for cases for North Herts District Council, any evidence that we gather would still be admissible in court. So that's something we're going to start to do from April. Really pleased that officers in the main have complied with the requirements of the National Fraud Initiative to extract the data that's required for that particular exercise. We're starting to see that data and those reports coming back to us now. It takes the Cabinet Office about 4 months from October to February to push the data back out to us. We've seen those matches now, and we've got a really good plan in place with officers with responsibility for those reports and matches to try and clear them up as quickly as possible, hopefully by the end of March, middle of April. And that's my report, Chair.
Thank you very much. Right, okay, so following on from that then, do we have any further questions or comments on that report? I just want to mention that we are being asked to approve this plan, the anti-fraud plan for 21-22. And we are also noting the activity to protect the council against fraud and corruption in 2021. So there's quite a lot there for us to do. So this is really your last chance to ask those questions if you have any. Nope, I've got no hands up at all. All right, so I am going to put that forward then, and we'll bundle those into one. I'm going to propose that we do approve the anti-fraud plan for 21-22, and that we also, at the same time, note the activity to protect the council. If anybody wants those separated, please say now. No? So, okay, if I've got a seconder for those two recommendations.
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sam. Okay, if we could just do a round robin vote verbally then, please.
Thank you, Councillor Aspinwall.
I'm for that.
Thank you, Councillor Collins.
I say aye.
Thank you, Councillor North.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Weeks.
Agree and note.
Thank you, and Councillor Oliver.
For.
Thanks very much. That's carried, Chair.
Thank you very much. Wonderful. Nick, I think that might be the last of your bits as well. So same for you. If you'd like to leave us, we won't be offended. If you'd like to stay, we'd be delighted. Do whatever you please. Right, I'm going to move on to item 11, the Local Code of Corporate Governance 2021 and the Annual Governance Statement for 1920 and Action Plan for 2021 update. And I've got Ruben who's going to take the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Two recommendations for you this evening. As Kate's just said, the first is to approve the Local Code of Governance for 2021, and then to note the current position of the action plan for the annual governance statement. I'm going to whiz through the report, starting with the Local Code of Governance, to say that it's good practice to review this Code of Governance, which we did this time last year, so here we are again. It's based on the good governance from the Sit for Solace framework, and it's those 7 principles that we will that sets the framework for the annual governance statement that we will be reviewing and continue to review throughout, and will remain the basis for the amendment, the assessment for the governance arrangements this time round. There's only one amendment, and that's to the first overarching council objective, which now reads becoming a welcome, inclusive and efficient council. And that's all Appendix A. And then Appendix B covers the action plan, which I will pick up those particular things. There are 5. They are all outstanding as I type this. There are 5 there. The first one is around the ethical awareness training, increasing the uptake for anti-bribery e-learning, which we've mentioned previously. You've got the figures there. I have spoken to Learning and Development, who are going to put a push out and plea to all, and I've also spoken to the training champions to encourage uptake on that. Action 2 is around reviewing the grant policy that was revised in January 2020. I was a little bit premature because I said there I'd do the complete cycle, and obviously we haven't had the March meetings yet. So once that's occurred, a report will come to look at how effective or what gaps there are in that grant policy. 3 talks about the gender pay gap reporting, and there are a list of actions there around what is occurring to address any actions coming from the gender pay gap report, which we produced annually. Moving on to 4, we talked there about the peer challenge recommendations, and you'll be aware of the work that the Shaping Our Future programme is doing alongside the inclusion group, which is an officer-led group, and to note that 17 of the 60 actions have been completed in this last year. And the last one, which was something we talked about earlier, the Recovery Project Board is working to deliver that recovery plan, but obviously that it reflects the current national picture at the moment. So whether in lockdown or not, or it responds and moves between those two as appropriate. And that's all I really want to say, Chair. I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
And so on that, we'll throw out for questions and we'll go straight to Sam North.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much, Ruben. A couple of questions. It relates to under the ethical bit. which is, sorry, I've just been to the bottom of the report as you were talking, and so I've lost my page, which was
127?
116.
Okay.
Demonstrating strong commitment to ethical values. The different points in there say things like seeking to establish, monitor and maintain the organisation's ethical standards and underpinning personal behaviour with ethical values. Do we have a list of ethical values, or is it just simply the Nolan principles that we are adhering to? Does the council have specific ethical values that we are supposed to, or we adhere to?
My understanding is the 7 principles as per the Nolan. We also have other policies that underpin that, the member code of conduct and staff values and behaviours.
Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to, because it just refers to them but doesn't seem to say which ones they are. But
sorry, I was going to say, Sam, that in the annual government statement, it goes into far more detail, and I think if you look at that big long document of the self-assessment, it details it there.
Okay, no, that's not a problem. My second question relates to the last point that you made about the inclusion group. As we'll know, on the 24th of September, I believe it was, we passed a motion to implement things like unconscious bias and training for all staff when it comes to racial inequalities. And obviously, as a part of our new administration's sort of council plan, we talk about engaging young residents and those who are disadvantaged. But I don't see any sort of anything more detailed in the action plan. Are you able just to go into a little bit more detail about what the inclusion group is doing and where we are with things like unconscious bias training and things like that?
I'll go in reverse order then. You may be aware that we have set aside each Friday of the first Friday of the month to have a learning and development opportunity for staff, where we shut the council office down and then teams are led through certain aspects of training. The last one on Friday was around equality, diversity and inclusion. So team leaders like myself did a section on the equality duty, unconscious bias and actually learning and development, put together a program of videos from a company they'd approached to talk about what is racism, what is unconscious bias, and those sorts of things. I don't have the details hand, gone out of my head obviously, but that is happening. And I know that for me, with my corporate equality strategy head on, that I have to undertake certain amounts of training for SMG and for other managers as well in that respect. In terms of the inclusion group, we actually had a meeting today led by HR and myself. And what we have done is we have set themes against the protected characteristics as identified in the public sector equality duty. So this first one was on age. And we had a group of 11 officers. We talked around what were their experiences, what barriers were they facing, and we will work through each of those ones as the year goes through and build an action plan to show, well, this is what you said, the things that are happening, and these are the good things, but what have we then done to address those?
I think that sounds absolutely fantastic. Just from the points that you've raised there, is that being fed into things like the Joint Staff Consultative Committee, or is that a completely member-free zone that staff are involved in? And if it is, are we sort of also considering the wider issues that our actions and decisions have on sort of our residents and things like that as well? So obviously we talk about engaging young people in the community. Is that inclusion group also talking about older people, women who are potentially disadvantaged in our society, and people of minority ethnic background, perhaps how we as a council are trying to support them in the best way we can? Or is it purely an internal focus?
It's a purely internal group, but if each of the reports that we have a section around equality implications. And so each decision will then go, well, does it show due regard to the Equality Act? What mitigation action is there? And then we as a policy team, we then do a cumulative equality assessment at the end. So we take all of those decisions and look at them in the broadest sense to say, well, have we done the best we can do? Have we put together a mitigating action? If we haven't, why haven't we done so? And I think Ian might want to come in on that as well.
I'm just going to interrupt a little bit as well. That's an excellent question, Sam. I'm so glad that you've asked it. I'm acting chair of JSCC at the moment, and we're meeting on Wednesday morning. And as such, I get to. I've had quite a lot of involvement with Joe, who is acting head of HR at the moment. And so I've been talking with her a lot about this inclusion work that's going on, and just to provide any reassurance that I can, I think that I've been incredibly impressed with the work that's going on, and the honesty and the safety that's being created in some of the forums where these things can be discussed. I've noted for a conversation at the next JSCC, so Wednesday's meeting, to just interrogate how we are engaging with the community in the same way, because I think what's happening internally is really bold and brave. And effectively what we're getting at JSCC is a report of that. But you're absolutely right, there's other things that could fall from that and be included in that. And what I'm seeing is lots of pockets of great work, and it's a good time to kind of bring those links together, isn't it? So yeah, I will definitely be picking that up on Wednesday, and thank you for that. Ian, did you just want to comment?
Yes, please. So I just wanted to sort of highlight how the inclusion group is planned to feed into other groups. So one of the key ways it can go is through leadership team. So we're very happy to receive anything from the inclusion group in terms of recommendations, but the other way is through Shaping Our Future. And that is, as some of you are aware, a member and officer group that is looking about the future of the sort of target culture for the organisation, and therefore elements of that inclusion group work, so standing icing on the agenda of Shaping Our Future, can feed into that. And obviously that will pick up both the staff side, but it can also then extend into how that then impacts on how culture will feed into how we interact with our citizens and residents as well.
Excellent, thank you very much. Getting lots of nods and smiles. So I think we're satisfied with those answers. Are there any more comments or questions for Ruben while we have him? Just remember that we are now going to be asked, or I'm going to be asking you whether or not you approve that code of corporate governance for 2021. We're not going to see it again for another year, so this is your chance, and that we are going to note that action plan, the current position with the AGS action plan. So anything else that you want to talk about or ask while we have this opportunity? No, I think we've covered everything then. So I'm going to propose that we do these things together, that we do approve that local code, and that we note that current position. Can I have a seconder for that?
Happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sam. Can we go around the table and take a vote on that then, please?
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Aspinwall.
I am for that.
Thank you. Councillor Collins.
I am also for that.
Thank you. Councillor North.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Weeks.
Agreed.
Thank you. And Councillor Oliver.
For.
Thanks. That's carried, Chair.
That is wonderful. Thank you very much. And Ruben, I think you're done. Same applies to you. Please stay if you'd like to. Please leave if you'd prefer. We won't be offended.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Ian, the rest of the evening is all yours now. So we've got item 12, risk management update, if you'd like to take it away.
Thank you. I'll do
We're not literally take it away. We do want to see it, don't you?
I'll do an introduction to it and let you ask questions. So I think most of it's sort of covered in the summary on the recommendations. So I'll just highlight some of the key areas. So in relation to the planning risks, there is, as far as I'm aware, we're still waiting a response from the inspector in relation to local plan, and that does have a big impact on how those risks move forward. So when we do get a response, that will affect those, as will, there are some decisions going to Cabinet next week around planning as well, in relation to both the kind of the next stage of the local plan, but also actions post sort of the implementation phase of the local plan. So they're being considered there, and therefore that's why the proposal is that whilst the scores remained unchanged, for review of that later this month, once hopefully those two have both happened. The next one to highlight is the homelessness risk, and obviously in the summary there you've got a quite detailed look at that. You'll be aware, so hopefully, that the planning decision in relation to the shelter was agreed. So that's positive in terms of how that moves some of that forward. But having said that, there is still a big risk there, and that's why the proposal is the increase in that risk score. What we might find slightly strange is that we are proposing that a corporate risk moves straight to being archived, and that's what we're proposing in relation to the workforce planning risk. That reflects that risk has been there for quite some time, and whilst there is still risk there, in terms of people will leave, it will be difficult to recruit to certain posts. Actually, we believe that all the actions that we can reasonably put in place are in place, and that risk is serving no real purpose. Everything is business as usual, and we will react as and when these things happen, where positions are difficult to recruit to, but the risk doesn't help us. It doesn't assist in changing behaviour or improving monitoring of that process, and therefore that's why I'm proposing that risk is both removed to corporate risk and archived in relation to that. Finally, I just wanted to mention that it's not in the report here, but members will probably be aware through Members Information Service and other updates. There is a potential for some flooding risk at Kimpton. That has been added as a service risk at this stage. Whilst there is potential, that could be a corporate risk, given the speed the situation will either come along or go away at. Either it will flood or it won't flood. I don't think that's particularly helpful in terms of that response. If there is a major flood incident, they obviously will declare a major incident and react accordingly. And if there isn't, the risk is still there, but it's gone away for now. I think what's more important is that once that imminent risk has hopefully gone away without any impact, we just review the kind of the longer term risk review of flooding in the district, because that risk was there in terms of potential flooding incident quite some time ago. We thought the risk had probably been managed as well as it could be, but obviously there is now a potentially imminent risk in relation to that, so reinstate the risk. But I guess we just need to review that going back and seeing, was removing that risk the right thing to do? Obviously, the nature of risk management is you can't list every risk that may happen, but equally you do want to try and capture the ones that are most likely to happen, and obviously when they do, it kind of brings it to the fore. That's why I've mentioned that in terms of that current context. The recommendations are in front of you, which are that the report is noted and that the potential changes to risk scores are referred on to Cabinet for their decision.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ian. Great summary. Have we got any questions or comments? Sam Collins.
I have, doing my normal thing, and I apologise to everybody in advance, of having a few questions, which I'm going to throw at Ian in a lump. They're a little bit detailed, and I'm just going to preface this with, I'm doing this with the view of this committee, which is looking at finance, audit and risk, as the name suggests, rather than going into the detail of the local plan and stuff like that. My opinions are known on that, and I think that's going to be discussed elsewhere. So rather than going into that detail, just looking at a couple of specific things. So in Appendix A, which is the planning corporate risks, in the work completed, there's a line about representation prepared with regard to speculative expansion of Luton Airport to 4 runways. The only reference I can find in any of my papers or anything I've seen anywhere to this sort of item dates back to 2012. So is there another more recent attempt to expand Luton Airport to 4 runways? And if so, when did that happen? Because that's surprising to see in work completed if it dates back to 2012. Why is it here? And if there's a new one, why haven't we heard about it? So I was interested in that line, and I think we need to go into a bit more on that if that is the case, there is a new one. In terms of the increased homelessness risk, which is the whole of Appendix B, I'm going to ask a question that's a little bit naughty here, but Ian Cooper will be able to shut me down if I'm overstepping. At present, the homeless people in North Hertfordshire are being housed by the council in various hotels and things like that across the district and beyond. The government have given us some funding for this, but the funding doesn't cover the entire cost of housing the homeless. The housing requirement for the homeless could continue for quite a long time more, and that does represent a risk of the council. At present, I haven't. Now, this is where I'm going to be a bit naughty, because I've seen this in documents presented to a meeting that wasn't public, but also wasn't part 2. So Ian will be able to shut me down if I'm going wrong here. But at present, the shortfall in funding is about £250,000 to house those homeless people, like going back over the last 12 months. What would the financial impact of housing those people be, considering the increased homelessness risk that we're seeing here, going forward for the next 12 months, considering if the government funding is at the levels that we saw in the last 12 months? I hope that question makes sense. And then the final point of note is there were some bits in Appendix C, which is the waste corporate risks. I don't feel that I should be throwing these questions at Ian, and so I'm not going to, because we haven't got the portfolio holder or the executive or the officer responsible in place to ask those questions. So I think that might come up elsewhere. And I know Sam North has been looking into that a little bit as well, because I've seen we've had a little chat offline about it. So I might leave that one to him. So I'm just going to leave it those 2 questions. I hope they made sense.
I think that they do. So I got Luton Airport. Is that something else, or is that dating back a long way? And then I got the increased homelessness and what happens if it being stays is for another year. I think that was pretty much where we were at. Ian, do you want to just take that?
Yeah, so in relation to Luton Airport, and I'll give the best answer I can, as it's not my area, but I'll try and say what I know. My understanding is that there is a subsequent plan to increase the size of Luton Airport. I don't know the details of it. All I know is what I've heard through the reports presented to Cabinet and the strategic plan reports that go to there on a regular basis. And that on a number of occasions referenced our responses to that planned expansion and the impact on the district. I don't know what year anything happened in, but that's certainly in there somewhere. I'm sure we can provide, the portfolio holder or the service director can provide a more detailed answer if required on that one. In relation to the homelessness, in terms of forward planning and the budget for next year, which I think is what the kind of thrust of the question was, for the budget, we haven't put specific forecasting for a number of areas of additional spend or reduced income, of which increased homelessness and the cost of that would be one of them. What we've done instead, as you'll be aware from the full council meeting, is we've increased the minimum general fund balance requirements, and now that will provide some, hopefully, opportunity to absorb the ones that do come about, of which some will. I fully imagine that there will be a requirement to continue to house homeless people beyond the 1st of April. Given that it is only a few weeks away and they're not suddenly all going to be come out of the hotels on the 1st of April. So I think there will be an ongoing requirement for the first part of the year. So yes, the costs aren't fully accounted for. And yeah, if it was for another full year for the same number of people, it would be a similar amount. And yes, it would be that kind of order of magnitude of 200 to 300,000 being the net cost the council faces. As you'll be aware, we have got some money for next year from government for our expenditure pressures, and the commitment that the sales fees and charges guarantee will continue to the end of June. But you'll also be aware, given the other pressures we face, particularly in leisure, it's nowhere near enough. But that is why we are carefully trying to manage our finances and using our reserves to get through the next few months and the next year, and sort of hoping to a degree that we get back towards normal, but being ready to plan with a new plan if it's not.
Chair, can I come back on the point on Luton Airport? Thanks for the answer on the homelessness. It's absolutely spot on, Ian. On the Luton Airport, the only documents I've seen going to Cabinet, and unless I've missed it, have been relating to expanded passenger numbers, a new terminal, which will sort of put everything over into the North Herts district. It'll go across the county line into Hertfordshire as well from Bedfordshire. But I've not seen anything that doesn't date back to 2012 relating to the 4 runways. So if that is the case, we really do need to be taking a much closer look at that. And it would be good to get more information and certainly put that out to the public as well, because that's a pretty massive thing if that is the case. And certainly I fear that if that is the case, we've missed something somewhere.
Okay, so I'm going to suggest, so Ian, you said that was not your area. Whose area is it?
It's Ian Fullstone. I don't believe, well, can you just point to where it said mentions 4 runways? I'm struggling to find it.
Yeah, it's in the let me just get it open in front of me. Sorry, it is appendix. It's on the planning risks, which is appendix A, I think, isn't it? Planning A, appendix A, planning corporate risks, and it is in the second section, which is CR 52.02, neighbouring authorities. And in the section underneath the little table, it is the second line down, representation prepared with regard to the speculative expansion of Luton Airport to 4 runways. And everything else I've seen on there refers to stuff that's relatively recent, but that seems out of place if it's the 2012 plan. So I was just a bit surprised to see that.
Yeah, so thank you, Sam. So that's at page 137. Would it be... Would you be able to revert to Ian Fullstone on that and just let us know via an email whether or not kind of what the situation is with that, and whether or not we do need to do anything further with that? Would that be okay, Ian?
Yeah, and certainly. So I suppose what was affecting on what was more around the expansion of the airport and passenger numbers. So it might be that the 4 runways hasn't come back, because I don't think it has. But certainly with some of these risk entries, they do kind of evolve over time, and it could still be an old reference. But yeah, for the sake of clarity, I don't think there is an expansion to 4 runways, but I will confirm as soon as I can back to you that what is the case on that one, and see if that is an old reference rather than the current one.
That would be lovely. Thank you very much, Ian. And thanks, Sam, for your eagle eyes. Okay, Councillor Weeks, I've got your hand next, if you'd like to ask your questions.
A throwaway remark, really, but it does seem to me, and I'm being driven by the matrix of risks here, it seems to me that we are top heavy with the serious risks here. Anyone looking at that matrix coldly will think that, okay, we've got a risk here, put it on the top. That's the way it appears. I'm sure there's good reasons behind why there's so many risks on 7, 8 and 9, but I don't know, it just seems top heavy to me.
Thank you, Councillor Rees. If I can just supplement that, I think I was going to ask a similar question, but not quite in the same way, but perhaps you could address both. It seems to me fairly clear as to why it might be quite a top-heavy risk matrix at the moment. I think there's an awful lot of things going on that would justifiably sit there. My question was going to just be, Ian, have you seen it look like this before? Is this substantially different to what you might have seen in previous years? And is there anything, is this an area of concern for you? And is there anything that this committee could be or should be doing to further in light of that? If you wouldn't mind responding to those two, that would be great.
That's fine. So in terms of why it looks top heavy, these are corporate risks. Sort of underneath this, there'll be lots of service risks, and they will sit all over the matrix. So to be a corporate risk has to be of significance to the authority overall, and therefore they are more likely to be at the top end of the risk matrix. I suppose there probably are a few more than there sometimes has been in terms of number of risks. We've got a few on there that have been around for quite some time, but there's also some new ones that have sort of cropped up in relation to obviously Brexit sort of come and gone, but we've got the COVID risk on there, got the planning risks that are there, and hopefully will start to come down when there's actually more certainty about the future on where that's going. So I think there probably are more than there has been. The other action we're starting to take, as you'll be aware, with the new sort of risk strategy and the way we're approaching risk, is to try and get rid of the old risks and the ones that are less significant, and therefore they tend to be the lower level ones. So therefore that will also sort of perpetuate the ones remaining being at the top end. I don't think it's anything to be concerned about. I think it's more for us to be focused on. It's just the nature of the environment we're in. There are some on there that say that I think will start to come off and disappear, and I'll add sort of things like managing the council's finances as and when we get more certainty over the future direction of how our funding, that risk can then come down. But that's been sat up there for a number of years now because there continues to be a high risk of high uncertainty.
Thank you, Ian. That's helpful. Councillor Weeks, did you have anything supplementary that you wanted to ask?
No, I don't think so. I hear what Ian says, but I've been on fire for a goodly number of years, and I've never seen anything quite like that before.
Thank you, Ian. Okay, if I can pass this Sam North now.
Thanks very much, Chair. This question relates to CR 66 and CR 67. I think, obviously, as we all know, since the new administration came on board, the waste contract has been handled incredibly well. But I do have my concerns over some of the risk gradings, particularly CR 67. I think some of the assumptions that are made are very, very big assumptions, such as if there were to be a mandatory garden waste collection, central government would fund it, when quite clearly, as we've heard so many times, central government haven't even covered the costs that we've incurred throughout the pandemic, and also other assumptions such as the implementation of the local plan, which itself is a level 9 risk. And so I'm fairly uncomfortable with the fact that CR 67 goes from a high impact, low likelihood to low impact, medium impact, and would be quite keen for those two risks to be referred to the executive member for waste before we make a final decision on those, because I'd quite like those to be reviewed by the executive member to make sure that we are happy as a sort of from a executive level, that those risks are being handled in and are appropriate to where we feel they should be. I think I'm fairly happy with everything else, and I understand Councillor Weeks' concerns, but I think as we know, with things like Brexit and the pandemic, there are a huge number of pressures and concerns that we have on the council. So I would be happy to support this report, Chair, if those two risks were perhaps removed and referred to the executive member for future decision.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Ian, can you just talk us through whether or not the involvement that the executive member did have with these risks, if any?
Yeah, I would expect, and I can't confirm absolutely, but I would expect all executive members to be briefed on the risks in their area, where they are corporate risks, so that they should be involved in that process. I suppose the other point to make in relation to the specific one you mentioned about garden waste and the assumption that if it was withdrawn by central government, they would fund it. I think there is a slight difference between sort of the impact of COVID-19 and garden waste. COVID-19 is obviously, well, hopefully a one-off event, and it is something that we have reserves for unforeseen events, and therefore, yes, it would be nice if central government find all the costs of those, but I suppose you can kind of see the logic about why they didn't when we are sitting on some reserves, and they expect us to meet some of that. In relation to a decision being taken by central government to create an ongoing cost for councils, and it would be a number of councils. A number of councils do charge for garden waste. It's a different matter, and I think that would be should be, and would be very strong arguments that it would be covered by the New Burdens Doctrine, which says basically that if government creates something that creates cost pressures on local government, they should fund those. And there would be intense lobbying if they did do that, that should be funded. And I guess the likelihood therefore is that they won't do it because it would be too big a bill to have to pay. So I think it's not impossible that central government would implement a change that would be funded, but I think it'd be very, very unlikely. And that's why that kind of statement is in there.
Thank you, Ian. Just to come back very quickly, Chair, I think I completely understand the points that you're making, Ian, and agree with most of them. But I think, and I think that some of those financial pressures are brought up in our other high risk corporate risks, such as the financial pressures on the council. But I do have concern that it, as says in CR 67 specifically, it is a very long lead in time, and there are very, very significant risks. So if there is any doubt at all that the executive member has not been engaged in this, I would like to remove these to be considered at the next Finance Audit and Risk Committee following agreement with the executive member. Because there are also not just, that was perhaps an example of one of the assumptions that was being made, and there are other assumptions in there that are also being relied upon.
Okay, that's really helpful, Sam. Thank you. Let's just move forward because I think other people may have comments on these, and then we'll talk about it in a round at the end. Ian, Albert, you had your hand up first. Could you come in on that, or was it a different question?
It was just, Chair, briefly, just referring back to Sam Collins's point. There was a solution proposed by an architect 8 years ago to have a 4-runway solution at Luton Airport, which would have also involved running Crossrail 2, let alone Crossrail 1, Crossrail 2 through Luton, through London and the other side. That was overtaken and disappeared some years ago, and what we've commented upon as a council and objected to as a council is the latest Luton Airport expansions, which was about 1 runway but 32 million passengers expansion, and so that was overtaken by events some years ago.
Thank you, Ian. I think if Ian Cooper, if you could still just get that in writing as to whether or not we need to remove it from that risk, I think that'd be very helpful. That certainly does give a good explanation for that. Helen, did you want to talk on waste, or was it something else?
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with Councillor North. I think actually that we need to be completely sure that the portfolio holder is signed up to that as it's written in the report. And that even if we were going to be really optimistic and say that no big policy change like that was going to come down from national government that didn't carry some funding, even your explanation, Ian, allows for the fact that there might be a period of uncertainty before that funding was successfully lobbied for and then distributed. So even a period of uncertainty would surely present a risk. And that for that reason, I think that ought to be removed until we've heard from the portfolio holder too.
Wonderful. Okay, so just to summarise all of that then, and that's been really, really helpful. Sam, yes, no, up, down. Okay, also yes. Okay, go on, Sam Collins.
Sorry, I was sort of going to jump in on the back of what I think you were about to say, but I'll say it now anyway. What Helen and Sam said, absolutely yes, that. But also, obviously, with the recommendation we've got is that we have to recommend it to Cabinet. It's subject to what Ian Albert's saying about Luton Airport being correct, and I think he probably is, and this is a reference to something that dates back to 2012, and if that's the case, there's no problem. However, if that's not the case, and there is some plan of expanding Luton Airport to 4 runways, then we really need to review that risk, because that will go straight up to the highest possible category, because that's a huge risk for us. But I think Ian's probably right. So just subject to that. So I think we need to make that recommendation subject to that being correct.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Right, so Matthew, you're going to need your pen. So what we're going to do is to take these recommendations one by one. I'm going to ever so slightly change them when I make the when I kind of talk about what we're going to vote on. And if you agree with that, that's fine. If not, we can have further debate on that. But if you, hopefully, we have taken into account all of the debate. So our first recommendation then was that there be no change to the risk score for corporate planning risks. And what I'm going to change that to is that we recommend to the Cabinet, we have to note them, so we'll do that first. And the next one then is the recommendation to Cabinet that there be no change to the risk score for corporate planning risks, with the proviso the Luton Airport 4 runway note should be archived because it is in fact extinct. Matthew, you might want better words than that. But no longer relevant or extinct is getting nods. And that the CR 66 and 67 be removed for other details so that then we can move that forward in terms of that recommendation. Other than that, there is no change. The next one will be increases in risk for the other ones. So we'll go through those generally, but then if we can then say that there be no change to the risk score for the review of the waste corporate risk under the proviso that the executive member has agreed and signed them off. And I think what that will do is mean that it can go to Cabinet with the recommendation from us, and it is also covered that the executive member has signed them. It stops us having to bring it back here with the executive member saying, yes, I've signed this off, and then us voting on it. Are you all happy to proceed with that, or do you want any further discussion on amendments? I'll go through them again when we vote for them. We'll do them separately. Okay, so first of all, then I propose that we as a committee note the reviews for the corporate risk. Can I have a seconder for that, for noting?
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, Sam. If we can just go around the table on that then, Matthew.
Thank you, Councillor Aspinwall.
Yeah, 4.
Thank you, Councillor Collins.
4.
Thank you, Councillor North.
4.
Thank you, Councillor Weeks.
4.
Thank you, and Councillor Oliver.
4.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the second recommendation that was changed.
Okay, so the next recommendation is that there be no change to the risk score for the corporate planning risks, with the proviso that the note on Luton Airport 4 runways is actually an extinct note and needs to be archived.
Thank you, Councillor Aspinwall.
We need a seconder.
Sorry, yeah.
Happy to second as well.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks. Councillor Aspinwall.
4.
Thanks, Councillor Collins.
4.
Thank you, Councillor North.
4.
Thank you, Councillor Weeks.
3.
Thank you, and Councillor Oliver.
4.
Thank you.
Thanks. So we also now recommend to Cabinet, I propose that there be an increase of the risk score from 5 to 7 and a target score of 6 for the increased homelessness corporate risk. Can I get a seconder for that proposal?
Happy to second.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Councillor Aspinwall.
4.
Thank you, Councillor Collins.
4.
Thank you, Councillor North.
4.
Thank you, Councillor Weeks.
4.
Thank you, and Councillor Oliver.
4.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So the next recommendation to Cabinet is that there be no change to the risk score for the review of the waste corporate risk, providing that the executive member has signed them off. Can I get a seconder for that proposal, please?
Oh, sorry, Chair. Yeah, happy to second. I was getting mixed up. Happy to second that one.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Councillor Aspinwall.
4.
Thank you, Councillor Collins.
4.
Thank you, Councillor North.
4.
Thank you, Councillor Weeks.
4.
Thank you, and Councillor Oliver.
4.
Thank you.
Thanks all for this, for indulging this. This is making it easier for me. So the final one, you'll be pleased that the workforce planning corporate risk be archived. Current risk score 5, final risk score 5. We've had some very good reasons why I'm therefore proposing that we archive that. Can I get a seconder, please?
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, Sam.
Councillor Aspinwall.
4.
Thank you, Councillor Collins.
4.
Thank you. Councillor North.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Weeks.
4.
Thank you. And Councillor Oliver.
4.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for indulging that. I know that was a long way of doing it, but it was incredibly clear. We are at 9:13. Does anybody want a comfort break, or do you want to carry on? We do want a comfort break. All right, let's have until 9:20 then. So that is 7 minutes for a comfort break. Do we have to vote on that?
No, Chair.
No. Okay, great. Go.
I was talking.
Are we all back? I can't hear anything.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Are we good to go, or do we need to? Is there anything we need to do?
You're good to go, Chair, unless you wish me to do a roll call.
I don't think so. I can see everybody
Okay,
on one
sure.
screen. It's fine. Thank you very much. Right, let's crack on then. We're nearly there. Item number 13, I believe. Yeah, 13. Ian, back to you. Third quarter revenue monitoring.
Thank you. So just to start off with the introduction to the report, and you'll notice what looks like a very large movement in the forecast spend, which given we had a more just a month ago, well, when we were doing the budget, would seem quite excessive. But what that actually reflects is that we've now essentially formalised the previous estimates in relation to a lot of the income areas and project them forward to the end of the year. And therefore the actual overall impact is the same that we've been forecasting, and a lot of those have actually been covered by the government sales fees and charges compensation. And as you'll note on table 6 on page 163, the actual general fund balance actually slightly higher than previous forecasts, so it actually would be a sort of a net reduction in spend on that basis. But you will also note the same from that table is that the forecast general balance is still forecast to be £1.5 million less than it was at the start of the year, which is the essentially the impact of COVID on our budget. So just pick out a few other bits in the report. So paragraph 8.4 on page 157, that sort of details where we are with carry forwards. As we get towards the end of the year, we get more of these. This budget has obviously not been spent this year, but there's proposals that the purpose for that budget will continue into next year, and that's the request there for those. So just giving back a bit, just to point out that table 3 on page 153 onwards is the detail of all those various movements in budget that add up to the kind of the number, which is the £624,000 increase in spend. And then also a few other things to point out. Paragraphs 8.5 to 8.7 on page 158 and 159. They are the health indicators on our sort of major demand-led income budgets. As you'd expect from the picture I've been painting all year, they're all red in terms of they're not going to meet their targets, but you'd expect that. And then moving on, the sort of quite detailed section starting at paragraph 8.8 and through to 8.16, which describes sort of how business rates and council tax income works and the collection fund and the uncertainty in relation to all of that, but also mentions the other guarantee from government in relation to income on the funding side, and that a high proportion of those deficits will be funded through that scheme as well, which is good for 2020-21. Obviously, the impact going into 21-22 on those is relatively unknown. We have budgeted next year for the impact of increased council tax reduction scheme eligibility and the impact on the council tax base, so a number of properties paying council tax, but there could be other impacts as well, both in relation to council tax and business rates. You may have seen in the budget that, so the government budget, that there are reliefs available for sort of certain premises during next year. So for the ones most affected by COVID, there is the period of sort of no business rates, and they're tapering back up to full business rates throughout the year, which is causing us issues with billing, but it is good for those businesses involved, and hopefully will mean that most of the income from those will be covered by grants from central government to cover the cost of those. Table 5 on page 162 is the overall impact, forecast impact of COVID-19. It's very similar to the table, but on table 3 now in relation to the fact that the numbers involved, because actually we've declared most of those numbers for the full year now, because we are getting close to the year end. But there are a few small areas where we haven't got the full forecast in, formalised in sort of the table 3 position, I just sort of do that reconciliation there, and that's why we don't apply the full level of the grants received at this stage to get the right end result in terms of general fund impact. And we've had a few references to this already this evening, but 8.23 on page 164 is the summary of the various grant schemes that we've been allocating money towards and paying to eligible businesses and individuals in relation to the self-isolation payments. And that's the position as at the 14th of February when this report was written. Obviously, in a number of examples, those numbers have changed since then, but that sort of is a fairly reflective of kind of the general position of kind of the sort of quantum of values of grants we've passed on to those that are eligible. I think that sort of covers, from my perspective, the main aspects of the report, but happy to take any questions as ever, Chair.
Lovely, thank you very much, Ian. Okay, Sam Collins, if we can go to you first.
Thank you, Chair. This is going to sound incredibly like the previous question I was asking, but I don't apologise for that. Something I always look at, because I used to shadow that portfolio, is the car parking revenue and the various PCN income, penalty, the parking ticket income. And obviously, we've taken a bit of a kicking on that because nobody's parking, because that's the right thing to do. They're staying at home and following the guidance, which is great. However, on the table, which you'll find, table 5, COVID financial impact on general fund, you've got the various areas. Parking is the one I was looking at. Now, on parking, it says, the amount missing is, we don't really know because we haven't got the final income over a year, but it's expected to be covered by the income guarantee. To my knowledge, that income guarantee is the government promising to bail us out for all the losses of COVID. My understanding is the amount of money that we've had for the loss of revenue on parking doesn't meet the amount of loss of revenue that there actually is. So there's a shortfall from central government to the money that we've actually lost on parking alone, let alone all of the other areas that are detailed on that table. So is that the case? And are we still waiting for money from central government? And it says expectation. Is there any certainty that money will actually turn up? Because, well, we have heard promises before that haven't been met.
So where it says expected to be covered, you're correct. It is included within that guarantee. That doesn't mean it'll be fully covered by that guarantee. For all the areas where it's yes, the coverage is that we have to fund the first 5% of the budget where there's a loss. And then the remaining loss is funded 75% by government and 25% by us. So in all those examples, we are funding essentially around about, somewhere around sort of 2/3. Sorry, no, government figure about 2/3 of the bill of the lost income. It depends what the value of the budget versus how much has been lost, but it's that sort of scale. We are funding about 1/3 of the loss, essentially.
And so we're funding about 30% of the loss of revenue on parking. So that's why I just sort of expect to be covered by income guarantee. That, I think, feels a bit misleading on that table, because that makes it sound like all of that income is going to be covered, and actually the case is that we're still having to fund 1/3 of it, essentially, which isn't the case. So I don't know, maybe this table would be more helpful if it showed what we as the council would lose at the end of it. So 30% of that 1.5 on the full year estimate on parking, and maybe the same for the waste and the homeless accommodation and all the other things, because we talked about 250,000 on the homeless accommodation. The figure here is 160,000. So there does seem to be a bit of discrepancy, and I think 250,000 is the more accurate number, because we spoke about it in a separate meeting. So I just have a few concerns about the numbers in that table and whether they're fully accurate. And I'm guessing they're probably not, because there's uncertainties in them. But also, I would personally like to see a column showing what the actual hit on the council is, because where it says parking, full year estimate is this, expect to be covered by income guarantee, but actually the reality is we're paying 30% of it. So I'd like to see a real bottom line of what it costs us in our pocket, not what the government have promised to do and possibly won't do the full amount of, for various caveats.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's not particularly clear in that respect. I mean, the bottom line figure, I am confident is our best estimate at the time. So 1.645 at the bottom there is net of all those contributions. So that's the amount we're still funding after all the income contributions coming in. In terms of receipt of that money, we have done 2 claims now, and we have for the various periods, so go sort of 3 months at a time, 4 months at a time, we'll be 3 in total. We received the first payment for the first period. We've submitted the second period, and I think we've now received money for that, but we certainly will do soon if we haven't. And then the last period will be to the end of the year, so we won't have done that yet because we haven't got there yet. But each of them has been paid in full in terms of what we've claimed, which is in line with what the eligibility is. So not paid in full in terms of the full loss, but full in terms of what we think we can claim for.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you, Ian. I'm going to go to Sam North now.
Thanks very much, Chair. I do agree with Councillor Collins, what he's just said. I think it would be nice just to make sure that that's clear, because anyone who wants to talk about ensuring that we are able to make our car parks free for people, we need to be able to explain to them why perhaps that isn't the easiest thing in the world to do if that comes back again or is suggested again. But I just wanted to say a huge thank you to the officers on the council who have been putting in so much work administering the grants that have been provided. I think at the last FAR committee I wanted to see something in our reports, and clearly at page 164 section 8.23 we've now got that. 5,500 grants have been administered, which is on about 15 every single day, and having worked closely with that team and knowing how hard that team has worked, I wanted to give my thanks, and I'm sure the thanks on behalf of all of the residents that have been recipients of those much needed grants over the last year. So from me, and perhaps as an additional recommendation for the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee, to thank the officers for their hard work and dedication during this time.
Thank you very much, Sam. I think that's certainly something that we can add on to those recommendations. In terms of your comment there then, Sam Collins, Councillor Collins, are you content with the net figure being there, and that we request that additional column go in next time rather than it hold up us doing any work this time? So would people be content with that or not? Raise your hand if you're not.
I would like to see more clarity, Chair, on that. Just, I think that document, it's a public document, and it's more a case of not what Ian Cooper's saying, because I completely listen to what he's saying. It makes perfect sense. But I think if you looked at that table on its own as a public document, it would seem a little bit misleading. The bottom line may or may not be accurate, but as I said, there's uncertainties in there, and that's entirely fine. But I think it would be really helpful, not just for the public, but also for Cabinet, to really see what the difference between the amount we expect to be covered by government from the guarantee scheme they've got, and actually what we've paid out, because there is a significant gap there. And I think it'd be useful for everybody in council to understand what COVID and the impacts of COVID have really hit this council for. And that table should show it, and it doesn't really show that at the moment. And I think the bottom line is a little bit vague on that point. So I would like to see it go to Cabinet with that, but I suspect that would be a pretty easy thing for the officers to add to the report, because it's a little bit of an equation that you can whack in there. So I don't know if that'd be a big thing for Ian to do, but if it's simple, it'd be nice to have that line on the report before it went to Cabinet.
Could I perhaps make a suggestion? In that, rather than us saying part yes or no, we just put a monetary figure in there instead, because that would still make sense with what's written, expected to be covered by the income guarantee, in the columns where it's no, just 0, and in the columns where it's yes or part, we could just put the figure in, if that's something that is viable.
Thank you, Sam. Helen, did you want to add on to that?
Sort of. I was just going to suggest that Ian advise us the easiest way for his already hardworking staff to include in the report some sort of mechanism to make it clear that the whole amount is not covered. Because I do think it's important that as a public document, it's accurate in that way.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, everyone. Ian, over to you.
I'm happy to do an addendum report or addendum table to the cabinet report, which will show the numbers. I think it's useful to have the part yes and no in there, because that is a different thing to the absolute numbers, because we could lose that if you don't. But I've had to add another column in there that says the actual amount. It's not a lot of work. It's one of the many things we've got in the background. It's just the fact that trying to cram a table into one page and determining what to leave in and what to take out, sometimes you take the wrong bit out. But we'll add it in and we'll squeeze numbers down a bit and it'll fit in there somehow.
Really appreciate that, Ian. So let's get to font 6, I reckon it'll be by the time we finish with that. Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. Okay, are there any other questions or comments on this section? All right, so we've got a very slight amendment here then that we'll cover off in all of them. So the recommendation to Cabinet is that we note this report, that the changes to the 2021 general fund budget as identified in table 3, a 624k increase in net expenditure be approved, noting that this is net movement, and it's expected to be covered by an increase in sales fees and charges compensation from government that's been applied. And also that the changes to the 21-22 general fund budget as identified in table 3, paragraph 8.2, so a total of 17k decrease in net expenditure be approved. And then also we'll add in there an additional addendum for table 5, include that additional column. Is everybody comfortable with that? Yeah, okay, so that's the recommendation. Can I get a seconder, please?
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you. And if we could just go around the table briefly.
Sure. Councillor Aspinwall.
I am for that.
Thank you. Councillor Collins.
Definitely 4.
Thank you. Councillor North.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Weeks. Councillor. Thank you. And Councillor Oliver.
4.
Thanks. That's carried, Chair.
Super job, thank you very much. And on to our final substantive item, which is item number 14, third quarter investment strategy, capital treasury review 2021. Ian.
Thank you. So I'll just be brief on this one. So the points I think to note are, as is quite common at this time of year, we've got a reasonable amount of capital slippage, capital schemes moving into next year, and they're detailed on table 2, which starts on page 171. They're all similar sorts of amounts of money, so I won't pick out any particular items there, but just sort of note that table's there. As you'll see in the recommendations, 2.4 is actually some reverse slippage, money moving back into this year from next year. So previously assumed that the gym floor work at the Leisure Centre, the North Park Leisure Centre, would take place next year. We've managed to find a contractor and an opportunity to hopefully get that work done whilst the Leisure Centre is closed, which obviously has less impact on the users of that facility. So seeking permission from the Cabinet to bring that money back into this year to get that work done. In relation to the Treasury side of things, you'll note in paragraph 8.9, which is on page 175, we did breach the strategy. Unfortunately, for a brief period, we had too much money invested with film societies. I'll mention there that we have now put a measure in place to address that. That is literally someone now double checking the workings to make sure that they're done properly on each occasion. As ever, it's one of those things where you're trying to balance the level of officer time with the risks involved, and obviously when something happens, the risks are therefore obviously there. So we've now put that in place, and therefore that shouldn't happen again. And also the sort of general theme for that whole section is that interest rates continue to be very, very low, and whilst there are some reasonable rates of return from historic investments that haven't yet matured. All the new ones we're putting out are very low in terms of return. And you'll notice even there's a DMO one there at the end of that period with a negative interest rate of minus 0.01. That partly relates to the government grants that we're giving out. Paying out to those who are eligible. And the money that we're sitting on for those and making sure it's accessible, which means we are putting out a series of investments with the Central Government Debt Management Office, and there are many other local authorities doing the same thing, which means there's lots of cash out there being invested in that particular source, which is sending the rates negative, particularly for short periods, but we need to get the money off our current account because we don't want to breach the limit on that either. And the DMO is a safe place to put our money. It is the sort of most secure place in a way. So just reflect on that and sort of point out why that's there. So that's sort of a summary, I think, of the report, and I'll take any questions.
Lovely, thank you very much, Ian. Do we have any questions or comments for Ian at this stage? Councillor Weeks.
Sorry, did you say me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. It's a question on the interest we earned last year, Ian. Our investments are carried out, one by NHDC and the other by a management company called Tradition.
Has everybody else lost Councillor Weeks? Right mid-flow. Oh dear.
He did say, Chair, that his battery was going.
Ah, that does look like that's what's happened. Can anybody guess what Councillor Weeks was about to ask? I know I can't.
I can only guess that he's complimenting the new administration's fantastic treasury regime.
I think he might have been.
Could we do a sort of pin the tail on the donkey version of what Councillor Weeks was going to say, where we all put something forward and then we vote on what it would have been?
I proposed that formally, and I think Councillor North will second. We should be nice and let him come back if he can plug his laptop in.
Absolutely. Let's just give it a moment whilst we all think of other questions or comments for Ian. Notwithstanding that it's 10:15. Anyone got anything else they want to talk about? Okay, right. So we've given him a moment. Is there, and no one else wants to discuss this report at all? Literally nothing. Okay. So lots and lots of recommendations to the Cabinet. I'm not going to read these ones through because they're very, very long, other than to say I think that's it's great news about the Leisure Centre, and it's supremely sensible. So yeah, there's a lot of recommendations there. I will recommend that we as a group do recommend all of those 4 points to Cabinet. Can I have a seconder for that, please?
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you. You've been a great seconder today. Matthew, can you just confirm that we're still quorate without Mr. Michael?
Yes, Chair, we are quorate.
Excellent.
So sure, I'll do the vote. Councillor Aspinwall.
I'm for that.
Thank you. Councillor Collins.
4.
Thank you. Councillor North.
4.
Thank you. And Councillor Oliver.
4.
Thank you. That's carried, Chair.
Wonderful job. Okay, we're on to the last item, which is forward plan. Has anybody got anything that they think should be on the forward plan for the Finance Audit and Risk Committee for next year? Next civic year. Oh, we've got a hand up. Sam North, yes.
Yeah, the only thing that I would perhaps suggest is as we do start to come into the proper recovery of the council, that we have some form of monitor in terms of our financial recovery following the coronavirus pandemic. And that doesn't necessarily have to be at the next one, because I know that there's still a lot of time to go, but I would like to see some form of something on financial and risk management recovery of the council.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Sam. And I think, Ian, what's your view on that? What is helpful for this committee to do in terms of monitoring that recovery? What would you most benefit from in sort of having external eyes on?
Certainly, I would plan to do that through the regular reports anyway. So particularly on the revenue monitoring side, the quarterly reports.
Yeah.
I would present to you where we're going to and confirm where there are still areas where we've either got increased costs or shortfalls in income. So hopefully through those, you'll get the information you need. But yeah, if there's information that's missing when I present those to you, then please let me know and we'll improve them. Hopefully it'll be a happier picture, but we obviously be aware that certain areas will continue to have costs. For example, we've talked about accommodating homeless people, leisure. There'll be costs going on next year. So yeah, I will present those, and if it's more information or different information you need, then I'll happily adjust the reports each time.
And so would you be suggesting having a separate item that looks at those kind of COVID things and recovery particularly, or do you think that including them in all of the different things that we look at, all the different reports, do you think that's more appropriate? Because it felt like Sam was saying, let's have something separate. Can you thumbs up or down that, Sam?
Yeah, I'm happy either way, just as long as it's made very clear in one of the reports that this is the implications or the wider implications of the actions that we're taking to recover the council from the issues that we've been facing.
Okay. Good, thank you. Anything else that anybody else would like to see on the forward plan? This committee might be different next time it meets, which is interesting. So yeah, thank you all for spending these lovely evenings with me, and I'm not going to go on. So that's it, we're done. Thank you. Thanks everyone. I'm going to close the meeting.
Thanks.
Evening. Bye. Thanks, Ian. Great prep.
Yeah.